What's up, everybody? Welcome to the second installment of Soccerology 101. Today, we are talking about promotion and relegation with the new European season about to get underway. This is the perfect time to sort of set the stage for ultimately what these teams are trying to achieve and avoid in league play, like I said, with all of these top leagues in Europe about to get a new season underway. So just we got to start with some basics about what is promotion and relegation. What does it look like? Kind of how does it work? It is a foundational part of what is called the open model, which is basically the idea that teams are allowed to move up and down leagues, that you're not locked into the league you play in. As we'll get into at the very end, this is not the case in the US, right? You don't have, for example, a AAA baseball team, AAA baseball team that wins their division or wins the league or whatever, then gets to go play in the majors. It's all defined. Nobody is moving up and down. Teams come in through expansion franchises, but everybody's locked into place. That is not the case almost everywhere in the world outside of Australia, the US, and Canada. Everybody else, for the most part, uses this open model where teams are allowed to move up and down based on how they perform. That's where promotion and relegation comes in. For soccer specifically, most countries, and especially the ones with the highest profile, the best leagues, where the best of the best play, have actually multiple leagues inside of sort of this overall league structure that all work together. You're talking about England, France, Germany, Spain, etc. There are plenty more countries that have at least two leagues as well. England, for example, has four that are sort of viewed as, it's called the English Football League. So they are all attached to each other to an extent. So what happens at the end of every season is that the worst teams in one league, and they're called divisions or tiers usually is how we refer to them, to sort of separate one from another. So the top teams in one division get to move up to the next division, and the worst teams in that higher division move down a division. And the idea is basically these teams just replace each other. So unless there's extenuating circumstances, you're not switching the amount of teams in all these leagues. The number is set. But who makes up that league changes every single year. And part of this, sort of the idea behind it, is to try and make it based on merit and performance as much as possible, right? You can have the greatest team in the world, but if you're not a franchise in the top league in the US, be it the NFL, MLB, NHL, MLS even falls into this category, NBA, right? Any of those top leagues, there's not a way you can have all the money in the world, you can build the best team, except you really can't because everybody wants to play in the NBA or MLB or NFL or whatever, and you can't get in, so those players aren't going to leave. So it locks you into place. What this does is this allows teams and owners to sort of dream big and be ambitious and know if they do well enough, they can actually move up and turn their club into something different than what it is right now. That's kind of the idea, is that everybody is invited to the table, everybody has a chance. Is the sort of the rosy, perfect way to look at what promotion and relegation is able to do. So how does this actually work in practice? We're going to take England last season as an example to really sort of just dive into this and show exactly what this looks like. So what you're looking at now is the bottom of the Premier League table. This is the top division in England, widely viewed as the best league in the world. It has 20 teams. So these are your bottom five positions. Everton came in 16th, Leeds United 17th, Burnley, Watford, Norwich City rounded out the bottom of the league. Burnley, Watford, Norwich are in red because in the Premier League in England, the bottom three teams are automatically relegated to the second division, which is called the English Football League Championship, or just the championship. So you see their records there, you see the amount of points. Went down to the final day of the season between Leeds and Burnley, but ultimately those three teams got relegated. Now every country does this a little bit differently, which is why I just picked England as an example, as sort of the country you think about first when you think about this kind of stuff. But there are other countries where, for example, Burnley may not have been automatically relegated. They may have had to have a playoff with the third place team from the second division, and then the winner of that game gets to stay up. So every country does this a little bit differently in terms of how they actually determine the number of teams that get relegated and who those teams end up being. But England, from the Premier League perspective, it is very simple. The bottom three teams get relegated. Now, where England gets a little more complicated is determining who gets promoted from the Championship to the Premier League. Top two teams, last season, Fulham and Bournemouth, automatically promoted. So right, there are 3 spots to fill going into a championship season, like the one that's about to start here. Those teams know if we finish first or second, we're automatically going to the Premier League. Third, fourth, fifth, and sixth place get a spot in what is called the championship playoff. So the third place team plays the sixth place team, fourth place team plays the fifth place team. The winner of those two matchups then play in a single game, winner take all playoff at Wembley Stadium for the third and final spot of team in this sort of promotion system, the final spot in the Premier League for the following season. This thing is called the promotion playoff. It's incredibly dramatic. That playoff final, like I just mentioned, where the two teams they get out of the semifinals of this third, fourth, fifth, and sixth place thing, is known as the most expensive game in the world because of how much money you make in the Premier League, and we'll get to this in a little bit in terms of consequences of relegation. But it is the single most, from a financial standpoint, valuable soccer game that gets played every single season. And so this year's winners, fourth place Nottingham Forest, were the team that ultimately got themselves promoted through the playoff. So that is what it actually looks like every season in England. Again, everybody does a little bit differently, but that is one example of how promotion and relegation plays out at the end of a season. Okay, so what actually sort of happens here? What are the consequences of promotion and relegation for teams that get relegated, teams that get promoted? What does it mean for the overall sort of landscape? Teams that get relegated obviously drop down a division, so your competition is not as stiff. The biggest thing here, and I mentioned this with the TV money from the Premier League, is your drop in revenue. Because, especially at the highest level, when you're talking about Spain's La Liga, the Premier League, Germany's Bundesliga, France's Ligue 1, and Italy's Serie A, the 5 major leagues in Europe, their television deals are so valuable, and every team gets a piece of that pie, that the gap between what you get paid from a TV perspective as a top division team compared to a second division team is just incredible. There's a huge gap there. So when you get relegated, your revenue is dropping significantly, which then also leads into you got to cut costs, and often that results in selling some of your best players or most promising players. Part of this is from a financial standpoint of the team. Obviously, they need to compensate for the fact that they're not making as much money, and part of it is also those players typically don't really have an interest playing in a lower division. So it kind of is just understood, and it's just sort of how it works, that the best players on these teams that get relegated, they're the ones that are going to be able to bring the team in money they need, and they're the players who have proven to be capable of playing at that level. So they very, very often find homes at another team in that division while the team they used to play for drops down to the lower division. Teams that get promoted, especially again from the major leagues, receive something called parachute payments. Again, this is varies country by country, but specifically talking about England, just to keep that example consistent. These are big time, tens of millions of dollars payout. The idea and why they're called parachute payments is they're supposed to help cushion the financial blow that comes with getting relegated. So for a few seasons after you get relegated, you do receive this extra infusion of cash to help you sort of rebalance everything financially. Eventually, those go away. They do not in any way, shape, or form completely make up for the money you've lost now that you're not in the Premier League. But they are supposed to help cushion that blow a little bit, make it easier to adjust as you sort of get used to life in the Championship or wherever you might be 3 years down the road. And in terms of how common it is for teams that get relegated to sort of bounce back, most of the time they just kind of stay as above average teams in that lower division. There are usually one or two that immediately push for promotion again and try and are legit contenders to get back into the division above. And every once in a while, there's a team that usually one that's already having financial difficulties, then gets relegated, drops down a division, and it snowballs. They get relegated again. It's a financial disaster, and it can spiral very, very quickly into incredibly dark places. This has happened to some famous examples. Leeds United went through this. Derby County is going through this right now, dropping down into the third division. This was a team that was pushed almost in the Premier League just a few seasons ago. Had to ownership mess, no money. It can get very, very bad. But most of the time, teams are able to adjust because they generally sort of understand going into that season they get promoted, there's always a good chance you're going to get relegated again. So they kind of already are preparing for that and can typically make the adjustment. There were 13 teams from those 5 major leagues I mentioned before that got relegated in 2020, 2021. So 2 seasons ago. Of those 13 teams, 4 of them last season were able to get promoted immediately. So they dropped down 2 seasons ago. They played the 1 season in the lower division and were promoted and are now back into the top division. So that sort of puts it in perspective. Again, it varies team by team. Generally, they are fine and sort of have to rebuild for a little bit and then get back to a point where they are contending to be promoted. On the flip side, what about teams that get promoted? What are they able to do? How successful are they? General rule of thumb, and I've kind of hinted at this already, the goal is simply to survive. If you can avoid getting relegated your first season when you get promoted, by and large, that's viewed as a massive success. And the idea is, again, this is all going back to finances, right? Money runs everything. If you can lock in that second year of TV money in the higher division, it allows you to then start investing the money needed to build a competitive team. So if you can just get the first year, find a way to get through it without getting relegated, then you can start sort of getting a little bit more comfortable and get the players you need to be able to continue to improve and put yourself in a position where maybe you're not as close to getting relegated anymore. And so you very often see teams that are able to make a run of 5 to 10 years in a league, even if they're not sort of a traditional power or viewed as one of the historically the best teams, because they get through the first part, they make some good signings, and all of a sudden they're just sort of a well-oiled machine that always finds a way to keep themselves out of danger, or maybe they are in danger, but they find a way to avoid relegation. So that is sort of the general approach here. You don't typically see teams finishing in the top half of leagues, contending for league titles. It does happen. Usually there is some kind of extenuating circumstance that helps explain that. But it is not out of the ordinary to see a team that gets promoted do fairly well. For example, in the Premier League, Leeds United came up 2 seasons ago, Brentford came up last season. Both of them finished 13th or higher in a 20-team Premier League. So you're talking about, 65th percentile or better in terms of their performance. That's not typical, but it's not entirely uncommon. Most of the time, you're going to see the promoted teams finishing somewhere in the bottom 5 to 6 of the league. Doesn't mean they always get relegated, but most of them are involved in what is called the relegation battle, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the term we use of the teams trying to avoid getting relegated. So most of them get caught up in that. Every once in a while, you have a team that does a really good job putting some distance between themselves in the relegation battle. But typically, you come in bracing for a relegation battle. You hope you come out on the right side of it, and then you start to sort of build your team moving forward. Start investing more financially because you've got more money coming in. Like I said, you're sort of always bracing for that possibility that you do get relegated. 14 teams that were promoted last season managed to stay in those top 5 European leagues. Sorry, 9 of those 14. So 14 teams got promoted, 9 of them were able to stay up. So again, your odds are fairly decent. This is maybe a little bit higher than normal, but not a complete aberration. There are teams every single season who get promoted and find a way to stay up. It's not like it's sort of a foregone conclusion that the teams that come up go straight back down to the lower division. There are plenty that are able to have some success and able to at least stay up for 2 or 3 seasons. So the final thing here is always the question, is promotion and relegation coming to the U.S.? Why doesn't the U.S. have promotion and relegation for Major League Soccer? The simplest answer is that, as I mentioned before, the U.S. uses closed models for its sports leagues. It's franchise-based, and as a result of that, there's this revenue-sharing agreement, right? This is part of the collective bargaining agreement. When you have lockouts, this is the kind of stuff that's getting hammered out and where the disagreement comes from, right? This revenue sharing. So the money that comes into the league is then divided among the teams. And it's typically divided fairly evenly. So what that means is, if you're a team that you maybe as an ownership group, you don't have as much money, you're just not interested in spending money, you're not putting much time and energy into really building a competitive team, you are still benefiting financially from the overall success of the league and the teams that are doing really well on the field and financially and building their brands and giving you more exposure. So as an owner and I just sort of specifically talk about Major League Soccer, as an owner for a middling Major League Soccer team, you have no incentive to introduce promotion and relegation, because all that's going to do is put more pressure on you and force you to spend more money, which you have proven you're not really interested in doing. You have built a financially stable model and how your franchise is going to function. You automatically get to stay in the top division year after year after year. And there is no risk attached to it, right? That's the whole point. What promotion and relegation does is it brings that risk in there. It says if you don't put the time, the energy, the resources into this team, you're going to pay a price in the form of relegation. It's going to hurt your bottom line in a big, big way. Why? And this is not me defending this thought process necessarily. But from an owner's perspective, why would you open yourself up to that? There is no reason to do so. That is the shortest answer as to why promotion and relegation is nowhere near close to happening in Major League Soccer. There is the people that you have to convince to make that happen have no reason to even listen to that discussion. Now, where it is possible is potentially in the United Soccer League. The United Soccer League has 3 leagues that are sort of attached below Major League Soccer. They're completely independent, which is not, again, not the case in Europe, but because this whole closed system thing. But they do have, the USL does have three divisions: the USL Championship, USL League One, USL League Two. So this is where a lot of your other professional teams in the US exist. This is where, for example, FC Cincinnati came from when they moved into Major League Soccer. They were a USL Championship team first. Having those three different leagues opens up the possibility for the USL to be able to do this. Again, there's going to be some sacrifice that have to be made, some convincing that has to be done. But the idea of being the league to bring promotion and relegation to the US theoretically could be appealing as the USL continues to grow and tries to find ways to sort of compete with Major League Soccer in the best way it can. This would be a way to separate itself. So I see it as a very real possibility at some point in the not so distant future the USL introduces promotion and relegation. No guarantees it happens, but I would not be surprised if it does. Just, again, if promotion and relegation comes to the US, it will not be Major League Soccer. That is the point to remember here. It'll be up to the USL to do this because you listen to MLS Commissioner Dom Garber, logic just tells you that MLS has no interest. They're not going to listen to how much fun you think it would be, how interesting it would be, how much it would help the league. They're not doing it. So that is a quick introduction to promotion and relegation. Thanks for checking this out. Be sure to subscribe right here on the YouTube channel. Hit that red button to get all of the video content coming your way. And subscribe on Substack as well, touchlinetalk.substack.com, where the full written story about promotion relegation, that second Soccerology 101 installment is, as well as all kinds of other content that comes your week every single day. You can sign up, get it delivered directly to your inbox. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.